Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. We're revisiting a topic that we've been championing right from the beginning of the Deep Dive Perspective, and it's about your freedom of speech. It's about your rights, not only in Britain, but beyond. What we're seeing is on the back of wars, forever wars, and of course, transnational corporation, imperialist control all around the world, reverberating in blowback, which means that our freedoms are being limited more and more. Still, most people seem to be sleepwalking into this dystopian, totalitarian present. I wouldn't even say it's future now, it's here and it's happening. With me in the studio, I have Dr. Rehiana Ali, who's been a campaigner. She's a medical professional, and she's essentially been witch hunted, and still is, with all sorts of techniques, not only by her own professional agency, but the establishment as well. Online, I've got the pleasure of welcoming Nilly, Brook, no stranger to DDP, and Nilly, of course, has been campaigning on the Palestine front, but much more than that, also on something which now is going to become very relevant, the National Security Bill, which is now actually law, I believe. I believe it's actually been passed, literally. The territory you're getting into is really one of gagging journalists, gagging human rights workers, potentially, gagging even, activists who want peace and justice around the world and to stop genocide. So it was already happening. They're increasing the screw, they're tightening the screw. So Professor Haim Bresheeth is also with me. Welcome, Professor Haim, because you've been not only arrested, but you've been also, in a way, witch hunted, but you've stood strong along with IJAN, other Jewish networks as well, side by side with the pro-Palestinian cause. But this national security bill is going to the next level. And also what the GMC are doing is very important around the IHRA definitions and the way they're implementing this. So we've got two things. There's protectionism of one particular state for some reason, the state being Israel. It can be protected from genocide. It can be protected from all sorts of war crimes. On the other hand, we've got other states, maybe Russia, maybe China, maybe Iran, who could be easily designated as a threat to the British state. I'm going to kickstart, I think, with Rehiana in the studio, because Rehiana, your campaign, HAC, is a health worker thing. So who would have thought that health workers, medical professionals, would be deemed terror threats? You know, it was almost unthinkable not so very long ago, and yet here we are. That's where we are. Now we'll go on to the bigger picture of this new law as well as we go on. But set the scene for us on your campaign currently and the GMC and the way it's being manipulated.
So I think the scene was set when we saw health workers being assassinated and killed and tortured in Palestine, and there's under international law, under the Geneva Conventions, doctors, hospital care, healthcare facilities should not be attacked. We are meant to be safe because we're imparting a public duty, and we're meant to be beyond warfare. That's clearly been thrown out of the window in terms of what's happening in Palestine. Israel is above and beyond the law. And what's happening in the UK is if you stand with those healthcare workers, if you stand with your international colleagues against genocide, you are also going to be targeted. And so this is lawfare and regulatory warfare from the General Medical Council. Now, some people may know my story, and I'm not going to revisit that. But when my suspension was revoked, Streeting, was health secretary at the time, set the scene. He said, it was openly in the Jewish news. He hauled in the chair of the GMC and the chief executive of the GMC and basically gave him a dressing down because my suspension was revoked by an independent panel. And soon after, in October, we had the Mann proposals. So he requested that Lord Mann, who's no neutral observer in this issue, because he was the government's advisor on anti-Semitism, to basically look into the anti-Semitism within the NHS. And obviously, Lord Mann, we know where this is going to go. There's going to be, ridiculous amounts of anti-Semitism in the NHS. No evidence, it's not evidence-based. We don't know what is termed anti-Semitism. As well as I do, I hate that term because I don't think that most Jews are Semites. So it's a ridiculous term to use. But there's no explanation as to who, as to what this anti-Semitism is within the NHS. There isn't. There's no hard evidence for it. Are we saying that it's a flag? Are they scared of a flag? Is it a watermelon? Is it the fact that, someone, in my case particularly, outside work, has spoken up? And that is somehow a threat within the NHS? And so Mann was tasked with producing a report, which he did. And that report only came out recently. And they produced a draft order and said that they would look to implement these Mann reforms. And that was on the 23rd of March this year. And those proposals then came out in June. And when you look at the Mann proposals, you realize how dangerous they're, because they're a complete assault on free speech. So if it was bad before, because bear in mind, I was suspended prior to these Mann proposals. So if there's people out there who think that they're safe, oh, well, our speech, I'm okay because my speech, didn't cross the line. That's just her, right? She crossed the line, or, she must have said something that was wrong. I've always argued my speech has been political. I think they'll find themselves in trouble because actually, when you look at what Mann is proposing, he's proposing to introduce the IJAN definition. So 7 of the 11 definitions concern Israel for a start. He's suggesting that uniforms, anything related to Palestine cannot appear on the uniform. But it goes beyond that because the level of censorship, what's quite apparent with the reforms is that they're going to be quite punitive. So they are there to act as a deterrent. There's already a deterrent. Most people can also already see that when you're not being allowed to work, as I have not been, since even the suspension was lifted, then are you prepared to take that risk even to speak? And most people aren't, actually, quite frankly. Because what they're proposing to do, I don't know whether that detail is needed at the moment. What they're proposing to do is, for example, the case, the way it happens now is a complaint is generated about a doctor. Mm-hmm. It's decided whether it meets the threshold. That's decided by an assistant registrar. Although I have new information about that too, as to what's happening in the GMC. And the assistant registrar, then you get a letter, and then you're investigated, and then you have to respond to it. And it's looked at by 2 case examiners. And the case examiners cannot punish you. They can either decide there needs to be further action, in which case they put you forward for a full tribunal, or they say no action. In the new proposals, the case examiner gets the power to sanction you, right? If you don't want to go towards a tribunal, then they will get to sanction you, and you get to decide if you want to have that sanction or not. If you decide to appeal the sanction, then first of all, you have to go for an internal GMC appeal. So you're being judged by the GMC, you're being found guilty, and then you're going to have to go for an internal GMC appeal before you can even go outside the regulatory framework, i.e. to the High Court. Okay,
let's pause there. Mm-hmm. Professor Haim, an indication that the establishment is hell-bent on suppressing and silencing this dissent, especially around, of course, the Palestine genocide issue, and you've been very active on this. Tell us your thoughts over the last 6 months or years, what you've seen evolving in terms of the government's moves against free speech.
Well, what we have seen is the removal of the protection of the law from the citizens of the UK. The idea of terror, if you look at the, you look at the dictionary, to terrorize is something very serious. Instead, what we are seeing is the opposite. We are living now in the 1984 reality of Britain. So if you killed hundreds of thousands of people like Israel has done and continues to do, that's fine. That is no problem whatsoever. Let's have more of it. If you are carrying a piece of card with some words written on it, now that is very serious. You're a terrorist. So we're living in an inverted reality where people that never hurt anyone are terrorists, and people who hurt hundreds of thousands, kill them and destroy their support system for life altogether these people are okay. For example, people from Britain, 2,000 or more, who went to fight in Gaza are fine. So this is obviously illegal because the international law is part of British law when it comes to genocide. So the Genocide Convention is enshrined in British law, yet Britain has done nothing at all to act against the genociders, including its own citizens who went to genocide in Gaza. But it does everything it can, even before this new legislation, against people holding pieces of paper. And if that was possible, if it was possible to arrest 3,400 people who are waiting for procedures now, nobody knows when those procedures will happen, but they are now under statutes of limitations. Some of them can't leave Britain, for example. The system cannot afford to actually prosecute and condemn those people as terrorists because there will be nowhere to put them. The jails are full. And with 3,400 people added to it, and new people are added every week, as you know, the prison system will choke. But that is neither here nor there. Keir Starmer told us that he is a committed Zionist, and as such, the system under him Mr. Hermer is doing everything to support Israel and anything that they can against us, against the people of Britain, who supposedly have a right for free speech, but that right is gradually undermined. So I think what we're seeing now is if the legislation that allowed thousands of people to be charged in a nonsensical way as terrorists, if this legislation was not enough and we needed the national security bill, then the situation is very bad, because now we can actually, for example, charity workers that work in Gaza to save people, because Britain doesn't do anything for the people of Gaza. The United States doesn't do anything. The EU doesn't do anything for the people of Gaza. This is left to charities, Muslim and other charities, and people who volunteer to work there. Those people are now going to be arrested as terrorists in all probability if they arrive in the UK because they are working arguably with people that are connected to Hamas. Now, of course, everyone is connected to Hamas in Gaza. Hamas is the government of Gaza. It still is. And without it, the situation will be much worse. But if you are working in a hospital in Gaza, or if you are helping people in South Lebanon to survive, then you are actually a terrorist. So I think what we're seeing now is a total collapse of democracy and this has not started this week, of course, with the passage of this new legislation, but it has been much strengthened. Democratic rights don't mean anything. And what is really also interesting is that in dictatorial states, normally the capitalist companies are not very strong. The government is very strong, but the capitalism is actually kept at bay. But we have the worst of both worlds. We have the large companies like Palantir and others that are allowed into the NHS and other parts of government. And we have a government which actually is not protecting the population either from those companies or from itself. So we have now found the nadir of the lack of human rights in Britain, and it'll be very difficult to go any further without an official dictatorship.
And Nilly, you've been doing some particular research around the National Security Bill in saying that actually it makes life very difficult for journalists who want to get two sides, three sides of a story, who want the opinions of people from around the world. What's caught your attention about the National Security Bill that is worrying for you?
You know, like before, the Home Secretary would have to get some sort of parliamentary approval to designate a body as a terrorist body. You know, and it wasn't seen as state actors before, whereas now it is state actors, and now the Home Secretary doesn't need any parliamentary approval. So that's a massive expansion of the Home Secretary's power. And, you know, we're looking like we might have a reform government. So they're like setting things up. Things are bad enough already, but imagine this kind of power under a reform government. And the reasons they use, like they passed it through Parliament within one day as like a national emergency, and the excuses or the reasoning they gave, they actually cited the stabbings, you know, the stabbings that happened in London of two Jewish men. Again, failing to mention that a Muslim man was stabbed that day as well. And by the stabber, the attacker had a history of mental health illness and had just been released from a mental health institution. So they're using like really flimsy false flag stuff like this to push through really draconian authoritarian measures that we should all be very, very scared of. And what I found really crazy was how little it was discussed. It was literally not discussed at all by journalists, by, you know, even alternative media weren't discussing it at all. There's been a little bit more discussion this week. I mean, I wrote an article about it, more like an activist article, not for a proper media organisation or anything, but like 3 weeks ago, I wrote an article about it. And there's been a bit of writing. Like I said, Paul Holden did an interview that was quite good. Zateo has shared an article of Paul's. Craig Murray did a good interview with Crispin Flintoff about it. But yeah, it's quite crazy how little discussion there is of this bill, which is it's a terrifying bill in so many ways.
Rehiana, you've dabbled in a bit of politics. You'd have thought that there would have been inquiry and critique and a real robust debate about the consequences, because just some of the things that are now being raised by others, nothing to do with worrying about what Iran or people who talk to people in Iran or who have journalistic connections or want to understand what the society is about. Forget that altogether. That seems to be a complete no-no. But if you were a welfare organization, a human rights organization, and you wanted to work in and around Iran, or even in the waterways around the Hormuz or something like that, and you had to talk to the Iranian establishment head on in order to get permissions or to be able to go and work on a humanitarian basis in the region, you could be deemed a terrorist. This seems grossly unfair, but it seems very deliberate, because the other thing I'm going to raise is there's a double standard here, isn't there? Which Haim has highlighted already about Israel. So you've got enemy states who might be fighting for their sovereignty, for their own rights, might be being killed for wanting sovereignty and independence, but you're going to be a terrorist if you deal with those people in any way. But there's another state which is openly live streaming a genocide, and those guys were allowed to do business, do anything we like. And in fact, there are people here who are being arrested and put in prison because they decide to speak up against that. Where's this double standard coming from?
I mean, let's deal with the elephant in the room, right? Why is Britain behaving in this way? I mean, let's not pretend that Britain ever believed in human rights, but Britain had a facade of having human rights, and this is how the international bodies worked. All of that has been destroyed for Israel. And the question then has to be, why and how? why is Britain damaging its own reputation? Okay, I'm not saying it's a deserved reputation, but people used to believe in the British justice system. People,
there's a law and order, there's a system.
Exactly, and they would have respect for it. Whether it deserves respect, that's a different question entirely. But the issue comes down to the Jewish lobby. There's a stranglehold in UK politics by the Jewish lobby. We have members of parliament, and I've mentioned this before, who are members of, they're Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel, the Reform Friends of Israel. So these are Jewish individuals. They're not necessarily Israeli. So, I think in some respects, in the past when I was calling it Israeli, I think it's more correct to call it the Jewish lobby. Now, that has to be differentiated. And this is rather annoying to always have to make this distinction. That doesn't mean every Jew, but it is a Jewish lobby. If 80% of Muslims, were backing a genocidal entity, 90%, I think you could legitimately say there was a Muslim problem. Right? And then I think you would be quite correct to say there is a problem, of extremism, of radicalization within the community. But when you have 80% of the Jewish community, and they are supportive of Israel, and that support is not merely that maybe there will be members, there will be British citizens, who will go and fight in the Israeli occupation forces, if you call it fighting, bombing children, but they will go and join the IOF. But there will be likewise parallel activities in the UK. And that means the lobbying activity, that means, lobbying the GMC, it means lobbying the, members of parliament. So that basically it does not, it's not in the MP's interest. And, most MPs, don't have that much in terms of, morality or real, let's say, belief in a democratic system. It's basically they need to survive the next general election. They want to keep their position. It's about power for the vast majority, not every single MP.
And money.
Right? And
maybe,
right? And so you're going to get this funding if you go along with the power that be. Being against a very powerful lobby is not going to help you. So we have corrupt individuals, and the system favors having corruption in the system. And that system is corrupted. So when you said, am I surprised? I'm not surprised that it took, it was passed and very little spotlight was placed upon it. But then I think this goes back to my point where I think that there's been a failure. On one hand, you have the Jewish lobby, but then you have the so-called the pro-Palestinian movement. And I think this represents the wholesale failure of the pro-Palestinian movement. And why do I say that? Because I say that the pro-Palestinian movement is very happy to harp on and complain. It's one thing to say, yes, I've been suspended. Yes, I've been attacked. Yes, I've been arrested. Yes, I'm a victim, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, right? But the question then becomes, what do you do about it? How do you respond to that assault? And that's what we were trying to do in Healthcare Workers Against Censorship. And we've been noticed, right? The group started off as a, support group. I wasn't part of it back then. But, I'm not interested, personally speaking, in literally just whining. Whining about that, yes, I've been suspended. Yes, isn't that bad, right? I think the question then becomes, what do you do about that attack? What do you do? How do you respond to it? And as a movement, the response seems to be, let's do a few more petitions. Let's wave a few more flags. Let's do a few more protests because they've worked so well for almost 3 years. They've been disastrous. Now, I'm not saying petition isn't helpful. I'm not saying protest isn't helpful. I think protest shows dissent. I think everyone has a different role to play, right? I think, some people are amazingly good organizers. They should organize a protest. But I've said from the very beginning back in 2024, when I returned to the UK, that protest, for example, it began to happen. I think IJAN was involved, protests outside the Israeli lobby, outside the Israeli embassy.
Embassy, yes.
Right? Well, maybe that was a Freudian slip, but it was true, the Israeli lobby. So the Israeli embassy, that's where the power lies in this country. Whitehall on a Saturday, you've got all these people, you've got up to 500,000 people. Very little time was given to the BDS. During the speeches, I did used to listen. I used to pay attention. How much time was given to what is effective, the boycott of Israel. But then I think there's another strand, and this is where HAC comes in the Healthcare Workers Against Censorship. why is no action being taken? You said, for example, why is there no scrutiny? How many organizations are there who should have picked this security bill up and challenged it in advance of time? The GMC doesn't really have a statutory remit to police my speech. You know, it is meant to make sure that I'm safe to practice clinically. And that, but it doesn't have a statutory remit to protect patients either. And it admitted that during a case in the High Court. But that's its role. It doesn't have a right within the Medical Act to police my speech. There's no right at all. However, over the last couple of decades, because it's been gradually encroaching on people's speech and their actions outside work, people have accepted the status quo. And so we're at this situation where you speak out against genocide, your speech is political. Next week it could be you speak about Palantir and you'd be in trouble because under these regulations, it could be any government policy. So we were planning to take the GMC, and we still are, to court over whether they have a right to police our speech. Really take the bull by the horns, because nobody else has done this. And this is what you call chutzpah. We actually do have it in the Act, because we're doing the case that matters, which is whether they had the right to police our speech. But what happened in March was that the other side always works faster. They're much more organized and they work faster, and they produced a draft order. And this was obviously to introduce the Mann proposals. So we had to prioritize this case. And we had a discussion and we said, well, we will launch a judicial review to ask whether this is actually lawful. We think it's unlawful for a number of reasons. It's unfair, it's discriminatory. There's no basis in it in terms of what they're proposing. It completely infringes on Article 10 rights. And this needs to be looked at judicially. Now, that's not to say that I have, you know how many cases I'm involved with in the High Court. That's not to say I have a huge belief in the judicial system. However, there is meant to be judicial scrutiny of certain actions, whether it's of the health secretary, of regulatory bodies, to say, are these changes, are they lawful or not? And I think the judicial system should be utilized in that way, almost like a reverse lawfare. And we are trying to get in before it gets into legislation. So we've acted, actually. And what we found is that because we've acted, we launched a crowdfunder, we've got the lawyers in place, we're looking at the documents, we're very clear what I want in the pre-action protocol. And if they don't do it, we'll do it ourselves, all right? We're getting massive amounts of suppression.
From who?
Well, I think that's a good question. So I would say I expect suppression on the algorithms. Okay, and we get that on the algorithms. I expect that. But what I didn't expect, to the same extent, I know there's subversion within the movement. So if people don't agree with you wholeheartedly, they will not back you. If they want to gatekeep your speech, I found that. I think we talked about it before, as to people trying to interfere with when I was being suspended and going for the IOT in terms of what I was saying.
Yes.
And my stance has always been, my speech has always been lawful. I don't need to seek permission of any group to do that. But if you don't stay within certain parameters, what you find is that there will be a sabotage occurring behind the scenes.
Oh, from within the movement.
Within the movement. So you can see that we've, the Hack has launched its crowdfunder, and I would just say to people, well, go onto the Hack crowdfunder, go and look at. Some of it will be because some doctors won't know about Hack yet. We're a small group. We might be punching above our weight, but the point is this needs to be done, and it's not going to be done by the BMA. It's not going to be done by the British Islamic Medical Association, which is too busy bootlicking, Streeting's boots and now James Murray's, and finds that it gave input to the Mann report, and everything it said was largely ignored. Right? Hack doesn't work in that way. We're not interested in having a photograph taken with the new health secretary. Okay, what we're interested in is preserving our right to free speech within the NHS. And as soon as we launched our crowdfunder, I think it's very telling that you can go and look at certain actors within the movement and see how many shared the crowdfunder. So even though this case will protect every doctor, so you could be someone who is pro-genocide, if you like, okay, but it will actually technically will also protect you, because we're saying free speech.
Free speech. Okay. Right? It occurs to me that the politicians and the political parties clearly have collusion with all this. And I have been watching, Zach Palansky and the Greens, and I think Nilly has been doing a lot of homework around this as well. We've watched Jeremy Corbyn and his kind of his performance around these issues in the past, where he was witch hunted and was probably one of the first victims. But then his reaction was very, let's say, there wasn't much of a fight put up. Maybe he just felt that it was a losing wicket and it just wasn't worth it. We've seen Starmer completely follow whatever the orders are from wherever they're coming, whether it's the Israeli lobby or whoever. And now we see Andy Burnham coming in, who's beginning to make noises that Labour got it wrong on Palestine, but they are just noises at the moment, and he's not in power officially yet. And I guess my question is more for your view of the politicians on all this, and whether there's any hope for real pushback and for politicians to actually defend our freedom of speech and to try to maintain democracy as we knew it, or to whatever extent it was, and to somehow stop these floodgates of non-stop chipping away at our rights. And my trajectory now is the politicians to look at what their behavior is in all this.
Well, the politicians are not doing their job. Or rather, I should say they're doing exactly what the government wants them to do. None of them actually stood up and told people what this legislation is about. So I want to say something that might annoy quite a few people, and that is that no genocide in modern times exists without a preparation, a legal preparation, and a governmental preparation. My family was destroyed in the Second World War after legislation was passed in Nazi Germany that started, would you believe it, with saying Jews cannot actually use park benches. And I want to say this. Once there is legislation that someone can't use a park bench, they're dead already. They just don't know it yet. And when the legislation in Britain says that if you hold a piece of paper with a certain formulation, you're a terrorist, then you're already in jail, even if that jail that can take you in doesn't exist yet, because the jail system is what it is. So basically, all the politicians of all the parties had a chance to stop this legislation, to change it, and they haven't done so. The only changes happened in the Lords. The changes didn't happen in the Commons. And even Zach Palansky didn't do the job that he should have done. He's the one we're looking at to make this impossible, but he didn't do it. So basically, every dictatorship starts with a legal system that justifies what it is doing. And this has happened in Israel, for example. Once you pass legislation that says that Jews are better than others, that they are the state only belongs to them and not to the people of Palestine, who actually are indigenous in Palestine, then you can do anything you want to them. And this is what is now happening in Britain. The law is used, and the law means political parties and politicians. The law is used to actually make human rights illegal, make human rights impossible, make free speech impossible. So if we look at politicians, you mentioned Corbyn. Corbyn did not fight properly what was been done to him, he went and apologized. And I have a lot of time for Corbyn. And I was in Labour because of Corbyn, like hundreds of thousands of people that came into Labour because they believed that Corbyn will be different. In the end, he wasn't different because we, as a Jewish anti-Zionist, the three organizations, said to Corbyn, use us as a shield, because we can prove that all this nonsense about anti-Semitism is just Israeli propaganda. He didn't talk to us. He didn't use us. He didn't want to speak to us because we were anti-Zionist. And Corbyn is not an anti-Zionist. He keeps talking about the two-state solution as if this was a reality. So I think so does Zach Polanski sometimes as well. Those politicians have not done the job of protecting the public, of protecting our rights, of protecting peaceful activists. They have stood aside when a government which is dictatorial and which is, interestingly, headed by, at the moment, by a human rights lawyer. This is the only government headed by a human rights lawyer that I know about. And that human rights lawyer is taking human rights from the humans of Britain. One month after another. Every year he's added to his regime, he's taken more human rights from humans in Britain. So I think the politicians are obviously responsible for this, but so is the media, so is other institutions like the Church of England. We are living in a society that is becoming more and more Islamophobic by the day. This is what I work on most of the time now, about the Islamophobia in Western society. And this is not done openly, of course. Like in Germany, it was okay to say we are against the Jews. But here we are against Islam and Muslims. This is not named. This is an enemy that everyone knows about, but no one speaks about. But this is very Islamophobic. This legislation, for example, against Iran, is basically Islamophobic. Iran did not attack any country. Let's just say this again. Iran was attacked by a number of countries. In 1953, it was attacked by Britain and the US that removed Mossadegh, that was, democratically elected because they wanted to protect the rights over oil that BP had in Iran, but Iranians didn't have those rights over the oil. Iran was attacked by Saddam Hussein, that was backed by the United States and Germany and Britain and so on, who even sent him poison gas to attack the Iranians. Yes. But Iran did not attack Iraq unprovoked. Iran did not attack the US or Israel unprovoked. It reacted to an attack by those two criminal regimes. We are not able to say those things now. We're not able to say that you cannot attack a country unprovoked. This country has posed no danger to any country in the Middle East. Now, the whole of the Middle East is one of, it's a chaos, yeah? Israel has attacked more countries that I can count and started more wars than most of the UN put together. And yet our country, our regime rather, not the population of Britain, but the regime in Britain, the regime in the EU, the regime in the UK, are all supporting this genocidal country. Anyone who supports a genocide is guilty of genocide. So Keir Starmer is guilty of genocide. Donald Trump is guilty of genocide. The heads of states of the EU countries are guilty of genocide. This is the Genocide Convention. And is there any action against them? And I also share Dr. Rehana's unease about the action, which, let's call it the protest against what is happening in Gaza. Because for 3 years, we've been marching, we've been protesting, we've been writing, we've been shouting, we've been going to court to get justice and failing. Everything that we have done has produced nothing to protect the Palestinians. Not a single Palestinian child was helped by us. However, and I'm not saying that we have done something wrong. It's clear that we have not done enough. We have not managed to force our politicians to sanction Israel, to kick it out of every organization, to kick it out of the UN itself, like was done to South Africa. What are we waiting for? Are we waiting for 6 million people to die in the genocide in Palestine? I'm not sure what people are thinking we should wait for. And yet, we are not even allowed to speak in favor of international law. And if we do, we are arrested, we are charged, we are terrorists, and so on. I think what we see is a collapse of democracy everywhere in the West in support of a genocidal regime.
Well, Nilly, we're coming to the end of the program, so I'll be specific. And I know Rehiana wants to come in on some things that Professor Haim's raised. But first of all, my question is, people like Zach Polanski, I mean, people had hope that he was the new dawn. Jeremy Corbyn with the Your Party, etc. That was another hope within politics. Are we just completely writing off now our political system as being some sort of, puppet entity which has no real meaning in the real democratic sense, and we're just seeing theatre? Number two, are people just going to stay asleep? Because whatever you say about the hundreds of thousands who've turned up on the streets, or you can talk about polls which say that majority of the populations are against Israel or against genocide. The fact on the ground remains that actually not a lot can be done to shift governments or the trajectory and that direction. Andy Burnham is claiming he might do something, but we heard lots of words from Starmer as well, and they all seem to have lots of words before they come into power, and then they all go and bow at the altar of the Friends of Israel, and it's all status quo again. How do you see things panning out? And what's our next step in terms of the people and actually pushing back against this kind of Orwellian, dystopian Big Brother rise? Because it's not just about slamming Iran, it's not just about supporting Israel. Once you take away these rights for people to say and speak freely, we're all self-censoring, we're all deleting what we say, we're all worried about what we post on Facebook. So they're achieving something else, which is basically mind control and thought and action control before we even do it. I mean, that's really serious.
Yeah, it's a scary place, but we've just got to push on. I mean, you were talking about shifts, yeah, that hasn't been enough of a shift here. But Iran is the country that is shifting things. It is the country that is damaging empire. And in its MOU, it mentioned Lebanon 3 times. So the country that is actually has the power and is using it effectively, they're the ones that we're not allowed to talk about. So I think how we can shift things and maybe take baby steps is in our understanding of Iran. So you mentioned politicians and Zach Polanski as a potential hope. And he is getting it hugely wrong on Iran from what I've seen. I mean, if you read his London Assembly contributions on March the 5th. So this was like 1 week after Khamenei was illegally assassinated. And we can see now you could see at the time of his martyrdom, but we can see it even more now how deeply loved the supreme leader Khamenei was. I mean, it's like the most vastly attended funeral in history. They're saying 45 million people have gone to that funeral. He's a hugely important character. And at the London Assembly, Zach Polanski said he welcomes the removal of Khamenei, right? So, it's illegal to assassinate a state leader. There was absolutely no justification for it. It was an illegal war on Iran, right? I mean, it's absolutely crazy that he feels he can say stuff like this whilst claiming he's a voice for Palestine. I mean, Iran is like such an important country at the moment, and to be that ignorant, I just can't buy it. If you're a leader of a political party, you can't get away with being that ignorant on such an important political player as Iran, to get away with saying stuff like that. So he's either ignorant or he's corrupt. I don't know what it is with Zach. I mean, I'm still hoping that he can be pushed. And then, like, within the Green Party, as Haim will know, there are different forces like pushing. There's a very anti-Iran voice within the Green Party, but then there's a sort of more logical voice within the Green Party as well that's talking about things like international law and diplomacy. There was a motion proposed by what's his name again? Ashok Kumar, a Green Party member, like saying that we need to work harder towards, diplomatic approach towards Iran. I don't know how much faith I have in it. We'll have to see. But there's a lot of happening this autumn for the Green Party. There's the Anti-Zionist motion, and there's this motion as well, which will solidify the Green Party's positioning on its attitude towards West Asia. But yeah, in terms of, you're talking about this dystopian future, I think all we can do is, for now, I mean, who knows where things will end up, but we've got a long way to go in terms of the consciousness within the UK, and that's something we can change, because being supportive of Palestine isn't enough. You have to be an anti-imperialist, and you have to get behind the anti-imperialist forces around the world. And there's so many people in the Palestine movement who are completely wishy-washy on that. They're wishy-washy in terms of their geopolitical positioning. They just talk about the People's Revolution, where all they're doing is essentially falling in line with Western imperial powers. You know, if you support Palestine, you've got to get behind Iran, because they are the ones, like I said, they are the ones actually damaging empire.
Well, you know, China has been vilified, Russia has been vilified, Putin had number done on him. So there's a record. You know, you had it with the Venezuelans. Maduro got the treatment, and of course Cuba is still in the crosshairs. So it's not just Iran, but yeah, there is a trend for our supposedly democratic state to tell us that we've got to believe and say what they want us to say, and they're doing it in all sorts of ways by bullying, it seems, and that's the problem. Now, in conclusion, Rehiana, you summarise on the back of this conversation that it isn't just about the doctors, it's not about the GMC, but where's the hope, given that the state is pushing hard and the public is still not awake? Haim, last word from you, a conclusion, just before the end of the show from both of yourselves. What do you think after this conversation? What's your kind of takeaway, or what's your advice?
I wanted to agree with something that Dr. Rehiana said, and I didn't get to it. And that is that most Jews in the West are still supporting a genocide, still supporting war crimes. I think that is something that we as anti-Zionist Jews have not taken up. As we've taken up all kinds of things in support of Palestine, but we have not taken on the condemnation of this un-Jewish action by most Jews in the West. You mentioned 80%. I think that's probably quite close to reality. I think it's about 75%. It's a very high percentage of Jews in the West who are supporting war crimes and the worst crimes that they and their families suffered from in the past. This is unacceptable. And we just had an anti-Zionist Jewish Congress in Ireland discussing all the things that we can do as Jews to undermine what organized Zionist Jewry is doing. Not just Zionist Jewry, Zionist Christianity as well. But our responsibility should be dealing with Zionist Jewry.
And you can all go to IJAN, and also there are other international conferences which Haim has access to. Haim's on most of the social media. Where can we reach you, Haim? Where's the best place for people to follow IJAN, etc.?
IJAN is, I think, best on X.
X. Okay, good. Well, that's a reference. And final word goes to you, Nilly. This national security bill, whose security is it defending? Britain's, people's, or Israel?
Oh, it's definitely securing Israel's security. And why aren't they calling for the prescription of the IDF? And that's what the Green Party needs to do. And I would say, if you want to do anything to help, think about joining the Greens. I felt very unsure about it, but if you join the Greens, push them in a certain direction, because everything's a bit uncertain at the moment. There are very strong anti-imperialist forces within the Greens, but this will become very clear by the autumn. We'll know for sure, right? And then we can abandon it or whatever. But there is the motion by Ashok Kumar, who is calling for more peaceful relations for Iran. And there's the anti-Zionist motion. And the Green Party should be saying prescribe the IDF. And, Ellie Chowns from the Green Party has a lot to answer for, and Zach, and they need to talk about why they were supporting this national security bill, which they were. Eventually, they had pressure from Greens for Palestine, but initially all 5 MPs were going to vote in favour of the national security bill, knowing what that means for society. And then after that campaign, well, it's a tiny little campaign, but it worked. The Green MPs decided to not back it. So they've made their positioning, Zach and Ellie, they've made their positioning on Iran very, very clear. I have far more, reading Ellie's email, that's really kind of put me off. I have some hope for Zach that he needs to engage with different forces, not Amnesty International. Amnesty International are very, very political. They're very anti-Iran. They might get things right on Palestine, but, they'd look ridiculous. They wouldn't survive if they didn't get some things right, yeah? But when it comes to Iran, Amnesty are very, very bad. They're misquoting figures around the January riots. And what Zach needs to do is start to talk to the Iran coalition and other people and not listen to Amnesty. And that is not the Iran voice that he is speaking for. He's speaking for he's speaking basically, I see it, for the Israeli lobby, whether it's indirectly or he's aware of it or not. But yeah, so I would say there's potential to push for change, and I'd encourage others to do the same.
Well, thank you to my guests. Some fantastic contributions from Rehiana, from Professor Haim, and also Nilly, all giving us a really varied view about what this dystopian future is holding for us and how much power government is grabbing for itself and why. If you've heard this conversation and still don't feel it threatens you or is a problem, then I'm afraid that you probably need to decolonize a little your own mind, because you're in trouble. If you can't recognize that your children and your grandchildren are going to be seriously affected by this, and that there's a complete attack on liberty and freedom, as well as specifically freedom of speech, how am I supposed to do my job in getting any kind of counter narratives over to you if I'm going to be threatened with imprisonment for 14 years for merely engaging with people who have an opinion which doesn't match that of the British government? And given that British government has a track record now in being part and parcel of the imperialism, it always was. We know we had colonial imperialism. Did it ever go away? The fact is, it seems to be rearing its ugly head in a very, very open, manifest way, first and foremost on its own citizens. Forget about the Iranians. I mean, they can defend themselves and they're more than capable of protecting their sovereignty. What about us? What about us as British citizens? Do you want a future where we're marching towards totalitarianism? You talk about worrying about China or Russia. We were all indoctrinated about how evil communism was and how China and Russia, etc., were, the worst things since sliced bread. Well, the policies of your government and my government are making sure that bread may not even be on our table pretty soon if they keep attacking the likes of Iran or China and beyond. Those chokeholds that those nations have around the waterways of the world will make sure that our table is that much more expensive and that much harder. Maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need a lesson in humility and understand what the Gazans felt and what the West Asia has been feeling for decades now because of our imperialist forever wars. My hat goes off to Professor Haim and people like Nilly and Dr. Rehiana, who put their own safety and security on the line every day with these kinds of narratives. We need your support. Please like, share, thank, and support DDP. We may be targeted at any point. We're certainly going to try and keep our head above water. So hopefully you'll all wake up. You'll stop these governments terrorizing the world. You'll stop them terrorizing your kids, and you'll actually stop just being, compliant people and become part of the resistance. We all need to be the resistance right now. Trust me, that's where we're at. Thank you for watching this edition of The Deep Dive Perspective. See you again soon.